What's up, y'all? You are listening to Chain Reaction. Thank you for joining us today. It's about 10 minutes past the hour. Which hour depends on your time zone, which is a statist concept. Don't even get me started. Happy Mother's Day to all of our male listeners in your 20s and 30s. I am joined today by Mr. Jeremiah Harding. What's going on, man? How's it going?
I'm doing reasonable. How about you?
I'm doing pretty well. A little bit low key day. Just chilling outside with the wife and the kid for a bit before he got home. Had a nice meal at a local restaurant, and I feel pretty relaxed, but also like apathetic. Like I was thinking about what to talk about. I was like, I do not want to talk about politics really today, or even economics. We will probably get into a little bit because, as most people know, it's difficult to have a conversation with me without me bringing up how evil the state is. But I don't know, I'm just thinking like, oh yeah, Comey was fired. Don't give a fuck. Another banker got elected in France. Oh well. Austrian economics still has a tremendous amount of explanatory power for learning about how the world functions and what is the best way to encourage human flourishing. And the state's still evil, but I'm just don't feel very strongly about it today. I'm kind of almost bored of it. I don't know why. Just one of those days. Feel all right though.
Well, yeah, I'm sort of the opposite because of a lot of things that have been. Because I think of me, I'm the fucking tinfoiler, and I think of everything is connected. And Lacey Green, for instance, she just came out with a video where she discusses the Red Pill movie, and she is Sex Plus. I don't know if you call her a host. I guess that works. The host of Sex Plus, which was a Discovery Network show about like sex from a feminist perspective.
Okay.
Weird. But the Red Pill movie is about the MRA movement from the feminist perspective, and
men's rights activists or
yes.
activism or.
And what's really interesting about the movie, please watch it. Like, if you're listening, please, don't just take my word for any of this, but it is very thorough and very good. And she comes to a lot of conclusions that would make most feminists very uncomfortable. And she was visibly uncomfortable while coming to these conclusions. Because basically she found out that her whole life she'd been focusing on women as though they were the sole victims of everything, and treating men as if they brought up their problems, they were somehow part of the problem. And she realized that men had a fuck ton of problems. And I won't spoil any of her conclusions because she's much more thorough in explaining what she thought than I am. Then I could be in a short synopsis. But what I can say is that the conclusion she arrives at is very uncomfortable to most feminists. And when Lacey Green saw this, she immediately made a video about it, where she was visibly uncomfortable. And Lacey has been a really, really big face in the SJW camp for a while, the sort of leftist, cultural, Marxist sort of womanosphere, where it's okay to do something if you meet the criteria based on their demographics, but not if you don't. And Lacey Green has been like one of those people that's said a lot of things about politics that she didn't appear very well informed on. And it was partially because it seemed like she wasn't willing to even entertain the other side. And
that's a tough thing to do.
Yeah, and she makes this video where she is visibly uncomfortable for having entertained the other side. And ever since this video, she's been in active dialogue with anti-feminists all over the internet. And she's seems like she may be either switching camps or at the very least
Having some
considering
empathy.
options. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, there are a lot of chauvinistic people in this world. Like, I've talked to a lot of individuals who are like that, and who, you know, talk about women's place being in the home, and who really objectify them in many ways. Like, it's good to acknowledge that happens and that occurs, and I am sure that there are employers who think that women's work is worth less because of their gender, just like I'm sure that there are employers who would do the same thing with men. But there is this lack of acknowledgement in the world at large. That's getting a lot better, of the way that men are mistreated. And it's just, even the thing that always comes up for me right away that I think about, I think because it was such a recent thing in my life, is circumcision. I mean, if you talk about circumcising women, people freak out. But if you remove the area with the highest concentration of nerve endings in the male sex organ without their consent, totally fine, totally normal behavior. Or try doing that with a female and people start freaking out.
Yeah, well, absolutely. But, you know, you say that you're sure that there are employers who think that women's work is worth less because they're women, as though that is some sort of systemic injustice. Maybe I'm misreading that, but
I didn't mean to imply systemic injustice. I'm just sure that on occasion it occurs at an individual level. I would be really surprised if it didn't.
But it's true, though. Women's work is worth less because they're incapable of doing as much in some fields. In other fields, they're capable of doing more. Like, for instance, if you want a field related to children, which, you know, quote, coincidentally happens to be the field type dominated by women consistently, then there's every likelihood that a more maternal approach would be better. Like, a preschool teacher who's a woman is probably going to be much better than a preschool teacher who's a man. But
on average, women are better suited to be preschool teachers.
Yeah, well, but then you get to like the much harder fields physically, like, and you probably wouldn't get very many competent female coal miners,
right?
And that's
you'll
why
get some, but not many.
And that's why it's a field dominated by men. They act as though fields being dominated by men is somehow the result of an immediate systemic injustice, and they refuse to attach the actual skills and the genetic dimorphism inherent in the two sexes to the actual result of those things, which is that men get much harder work than women do. And then they want equality in the results of that work. You know, like they don't get drafted. They don't get coal miner jobs. They don't die on the job as much or get injured as much. But then they want to treat it as though having to fill out a bit more paperwork to get birth control is somehow the worst thing in America right now. And, you know, they aren't dying. It's not happening.
Yeah. Yeah, the misleading language is like one of the most frustrating parts, where people talk about birth control and they always use deceptive phrases like the employer is restricting my access to birth control when they don't, necessarily provide the insurance that covers it, as if somehow not giving someone something is restricting their access to something else.
Well, and that's sort of the thing. Like, I mean, that sort of makes sense in a very dogmatic sense. But consider it, for instance, and I'm playing devil's advocate here. For instance, if a road is blocked that's controlled by the government, and you can't get from point A to point B, then they are blocking your access to point B. Whether or not there are other roads to get to point B, they are still blocking your access and restricting your access to point B. And so, if the traditional way with which a woman can receive birth control is through government paid channels, then perhaps you could see that it's being restricted because it's the flow is being stemmed. But that's a very hard argument to make when you realize that women are allowed so many things that men aren't. They have the bulk of custody. They have the the minority of occupational deaths, of suicides, of even mental health issues that are severe enough to promote suicide. They have all the abuse shelters, and men have no funding to any of those abuse shelters. And
Yeah, and
so
I think it's something like 40% of domestic abuse cases are of women abusing men.
46.
46. Okay. I haven't heard those numbers in a long time. And that's one of those things where I would suspect, I don't have any evidence of this, just based upon what I know of, men and women. I would suspect that goes underreported in terms of
yes,
females
yeah.
dating males. That would make the most sense to me. But I haven't done any research.
And it's also somewhat because, like, if you hear commotion in somebody's house and a woman is screaming and a man is not, but there's a man and a woman in there, using what's called the Duluth model, you're supposed to assume that it was the man who did it, because he's got all these advantages and he's over her and blah 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 blah. So clearly he's the abuser. And it's irrespective of evidence. It doesn't care about, rationally evaluating things in the moment. It cares about statistics and averages when it comes to that.
Yeah.
But these people are so dogmatic that even if there was somehow a massive societal shift and more men were killing more women were killing more men, and more women were abusing more men, even if it was by a factor of something like 3/4 to 1/4, the majority of these people wouldn't listen to those statistics to begin with. And the people who did would just say, well, it's based on a history of oppression, in the same way that the fucking what's his name, Ghazi Kozdo, I think his
Dude,
name.
you know so many names of people I've never heard of.
Yeah, well, it's encyclopedia up here. But Ghazi Kozdo is part of the Uhuru movement, I think is what it's called, which is a black nationalist movement, and he requires white people who participate to pay him directly, because it's based on history of oppression, that white people still benefit from privilege and blah blah. And it'd be the same way with women, the same way, because even if it was demonstrable that the men were being abused on a massive scale greater than women were, it wouldn't be sufficient for feminists to see that, to change their models. At least not the most dogmatic ones. We've seen an example of a feminist who's willing to think clearly, after presented with uncomfortable information, in the form of Lacey Green. But then you've got people she talked to, like Chanty Morris, Big Red, who's this just huge cunt. And she says Crimea River whenever men try to talk about any of their issues, or her big famous line, which is "Shut the fuck up." And she was part of a group that pulled a fire alarm on a men's rights meeting in Edmonton, Canada, I believe. It was
It's just the worst.
well, Edmonton, Ontario, I think. So, well, something like that. Edmonton is in Canada. I just don't know how their fucking commas work. But like,
All these groups, man. All these groups that are scared of words, that are scared of people
yes,
sharing ideas. That's how you know they're full of nonsense. That's how you know
mhm.
they're just peddling a bunch of bullshit that is completely irrational. That they rarely will engage in any sort of debate, and then they use all these different tactics to prevent people from speaking.
Yeah,
It's just insane that anyone would give them any sort of credit or see them as thought leaders, which many people do, and see them their ideas even as valid when they not only refuse to test them in direct conversation with others, but they try to shut down directly the people that say things they don't like.
well, and they'll oftentimes they'll use this sort of excuse, because that's what it is, and I'm going to call it what it is. It's an excuse that Hitler rose to power after rhetorical uh, devices were successfully employed, and so if you shut down the rhetoric, you can keep a movement nipped in the bud. According to these people, the cultural
Yeah.
Marxist left, um, who also conveniently forget that their sort of leftist ideals have failed every country they've ever been involved with. um but that's not real, of course.
Right.
But the
Well,
people,
all
they
these
don't care.
socialist governments become capitalists as soon as they fail, according to those
Well,
people.
capitalist, yeah.
Right.
Like, it's not
By
even
their
capitalist
reasoning.
to me. Like,
Oh no, of
it's
course not. It's not capitalist at all. It's just people being, Venezuela, all these, companies not providing the products at the right price, taking over
yeah.
industries. They're so
and
capitalistic.
and that's the other part of it, is like, you know it's capitalist in a Marxist sense. And then they claim that he coined the term, when they don't look at like basic research and realize that capitalismo has been a term since like fucking 17th century, 18th maybe. It's one of those. And it's either the 1700s or the 17th century. So, go figure. But they don't care about the consequences of these beliefs, and they don't care about the reason behind these beliefs, because they want their ideas to be pushed through, because they see it as the only way to either satisfy their particular interest group, which, since I'm a dirty cynic, I think is the majority of them, who just want to satisfy their group, um, or they don't care about the consequences, as long as they don't get fascism, like actual Hitler fascism, not just fascism as in they sold something and it didn't represent my group the way I liked, so
Yeah.
it's fascism.
Yeah. The way to deal with rhetoric is by pointing it out and pointing out why it's a bunch of nonsense. I want to say I looked at the chat a little bit, the YouTube. We're going to, I didn't announce this at the top of the show, I meant to. What we're going to do is, sometimes we get a lot of engagement, sometimes we don't get much at all, but we're going to take a look at the chat over like the last 10 minutes of the show so we don't get bogged down and distracted mid-show. So if you're commenting in the chat, we will perhaps remark on that at the end of the show. But I saw that Sam Warner was in there. Sam, if you're still around, thanks for saying hi from Alaska. Always good to see your face. Sam, in case anyone's interested and you like listening to stuff on YouTube, his channel, he just puts up a bunch of different books and stuff from various Austrian economists and anarchist ethicists. So he provides a helpful resource for people who enjoy listening to that stuff via YouTube instead of downloading the audiobook at like Mises.org or something. So that interests you, check out his channel. And after this point, I'm not going to look at the YouTube chat anymore until toward the end of the show. I just wanted to remark on that quick. Oh, and also, in case anyone is watching, I took down a bunch of doors in my house this week and am spraying them in my basement. So I no longer have a door on this room, and my cat is really getting in my way. So if you're watching that, this just something I apparently have to deal with this week because I don't have a way to exclude her from this room.
Well, you just need to give her some blue raz bang, and then she will be so spazzed out that she'll just sort of lay there and look at the ceiling.
That is not the way that cats respond to stimuli.
Really? They don't just chill?
No. Not this cat especially. She likes running after things and hunting things, and she, I am so anti-politics today. So now I'm just going to talk about my cat like a crazy cat lady. She, in the summer, which it's coming up on it now, she will go outside and get on the top of the roof where she will catch bats and then carry them down in her mouth. And if we're not careful, when we let her inside sometimes, she brings a bat in her mouth so she can set it on the ground and wait for it to fly away and chase it down so she can keep playing with it. She is a spaz in terms of her activity level. Cats are my favorite because they're easy. They poop in a box. Never need to take them outside. Don't need to put them on a leash. Although in California, you guys have like animals that kill cats, don't you?
I've heard if they're that outside, like coyotes absolutely, and stuff. Yeah. We got coyotes. We got you might catch the occasional lynx. Bobcat anyway. We've got owls. Owls will pick up your cat and take it away. And the occasional hawk. But just like predators. But yeah, obviously if your cat isn't the sort of cat to stay in your yard, which those do exist, but they're very rare, then yeah, your cat's probably at risk.
Yeah. I just feel like I'd rather my cat get run over by a car because she gets to go outside than have to be stuck inside all day. Just because, I don't know. Seems like they're not really being a cat. They're hunters by nature.
Yeah, but keep in mind that cats historically were palace guards. So if you look at it that way, as long as you have a big enough house, it's probably fine.
Yeah.
Like an apartment would obviously be problematic, but a big enough house. Plus, of course, an apartment's problematic because you don't know where to store everything. So,
yeah. Well, here's what's problematic about a house. So we got this house. It's not big, but it's like 4 bedrooms. And then, as I remodeled stuff and got all the bedrooms ready, there's a lot of negative things about being married that I could talk about on the show, but I feel like that's completely designed for another podcast. But then, the wife just insists upon furnishing all these rooms. So we just got to get a bunch of shit to put in these rooms to make them look nice, even though it was just us two for 4 years in this house. And now it's just us and a kid. So we have we had 2 empty rooms that had stuff in them. So for a while we had 3 guest bedrooms that were fully ready with dressers and beds, closet space, different stuff in them that were never used at all. And then when we got a kid, we had to get rid of like 2 rooms worth of stuff because we did so much moving stuff around. So I appreciate an apartment is what I wanted to say, because at least you don't have a bunch of shit you have to deal with. It forces you to be a little bit more minimalistic, which I appreciate. Kidding?
Yeah, well, I
You're
just don't
starting to
have a
piss
whole
me
lot
off.
of stuff anyway.
Good. Good. Stuff sucks. I have a bunch of stuff, but it's most of it's like tools. Most of like the stuff that I own.
Well,
Um,
what I have that I
let's
use a lot of the time, um, that I probably will never get rid of, are these, which are my Kali practice sticks. And what I use these for is to practice the martial art Eskrima or Kali. And it's a handy way to deal with stress. That means you don't need a whole lot of stuff to constantly rearrange to feel better. So maybe your wife just needs Kali.
I'll suggest that to her. I'll go outside and get her some sticks and say, hey, let's get rid of some
buy
stuff
good
and
Kali
throw stuff.
sticks.
I'll go to Menards and get some dowels. How's that?
There you go.
Yeah.
Cut them into like 2 foot pieces, maybe 1.5,
All right.
and start practicing Kali. Go to Paul Ingram, I believe is his name, at Kali Center on YouTube. He's got a lot of great techniques.
All right. Let's randomly transition. I want you wrote a letter recently. I mean, today's show is just so ridiculously casual. I blame the cat. I mean, she has really started to piss me off. Well, you wrote a letter on timetofree.us, which I thought was good, and I don't know, just knowing you, I thought it was helpful and I enjoyed reading it. Would you be willing to like summarize, discuss it a little bit?
Yeah, basically I fucked up in my editorship at Time to Free Us. I didn't do nearly as much as I should have to both make sure that I could keep on being editor reliably, and like make the site what it needed to be. And part of the problem with that, which wasn't just like my personal things, which is taking on too much, hyping that up so that it's like, an insane amount of stuff all at once, and then still having to do all the other stuff in my personal and, professional life, whatever that is. And, basically, other than that, I recognize these things pretty much from the start, but I didn't want to be an ass necessarily and start making a bunch of restrictions that needed to be maintained or you couldn't submit content, because the point of it was sort of anarchy, like what it is. And so I didn't want to start being very controlling in something that should have been totally anarchistic. And it can still be anarchistic with rules, just not rulers.
Of course.
Yeah. But I didn't want to start giving off the impression that you had to, like, your pieces had to be fantastic in order to be submitted and couldn't just be good.
Right.
Couldn't
you want to give voices to a wide variety of people.
And I still do.
Yeah.
But I have some new requirements for content submitted to Time to Free Us. Now, I want to preface this by saying if you have a podcast you want to get going, talk to us about that. You could even just send a message to Chain Reaction and say, hey, I want to know how that would work. I have an anti-government podcast. It must be anti-government because we're not going to have fucking statism on timetofree.us. That's the opposite of the point. But
yeah, or on a different topic where you as an individual are anti-government. I'm not. Didn't mean to speak for you. I was just.
No, that's exactly it, though. It has to be anti-government content, which has always been the requirement for Time to Free.us posts. But now I also have several things, and if you want to get a broader picture of it, read the letter, and you can. It's a letter that is on a Bipcot license, like the rest of the site stuff. So if you want to distribute it around and spread the word with that, just as a sort of, I guess, imitation press release, then go for it. But so the first bullet point is without styling. The pieces must be without styling or font or size or type changes outside of the use of the editing tools in the site. Because basically I kept on having to make the pieces look uniform, for the site, and I can't. I'm not paid to do this job. I'm gonna set up a Patreon soon, but I didn't set it up before I wanted to release the letters, so I didn't get anything going for that yet. But once I get the Patreon going, obviously you guys can donate per month, and we'll start divvying up the amount of Patreon bucks per view on the articles. But the general idea is that I don't want to have to go into the HTML and restyle everything, because it was starting to take like sometimes an hour, and like 30 minutes to an hour, that's like what it would take normally per piece. Um, and sometimes I remember one piece, I wasn't going to just, turn it back, because again, I didn't want to be an ass necessarily, but one piece took like 2.5 hours to get totally properly formatted and corrected. And that's unacceptable for unpaid work. So that spelling and grammar must both be adequate. It has to have a featured image, and it must be at least 300 words for SEO. All of this stuff, and the featured image has to be like, you have to like either state who the license holder is, because their state is shit and they make copyright shit, or it has to be CC0 licensed, or from the Wikimedia Commons. Like. And that's sort of the CCO licensing isn't like you couldn't use other Creative Commons shit. It's just CCO is the license without any rights. It's basically public domain. And that means that you can use the image without any permission or attribution or anything, and you don't have to have a caption or find the artist. But you can use, obviously, other Creative Commons stuff. You would just need to follow the Creative Commons attribution rules. And if you're trying to avoid doing, that very small amount of work, which, I don't have any problem with doing that amount of work for a picture, then, if you're fine with doing that amount of work, then you could just list the person who originally took the picture anyway. But it's much easier on Creative Commons, because all you have to do is say CC, like 2.0, 3.0, buy license with this person's name next to it. Image, Creative Commons 3.0 license holder, fucking Jacqueline Molyneux, something. And because I want it to be professional as well. I want everything to look good, and that's one of the reasons that I had to edit the pieces so constantly, is because in order to, have a uniform presence, the site has to have a uniform feel and look. And so basically, yeah, it's and I ended the letter with saying, like, it's not intended to be accusatory. It's not saying that the mess ups were my fault, or your fault. It's saying that they were my fault, but it's partially because one of the things that was my fault was that I wasn't putting any requirements on submissions, and that needed to stop. So I needed to be very clear and elucidate what needs to be done.
Yeah, guidelines within which to work can be really helpful. I think most people just didn't know, what you were looking for, and in terms of the formatting and stuff. Obviously, if there's a bunch of spelling and grammar errors, that becomes problematic. Usually, I have at least one unfinished sentence in everything that I write, because I hate editing. But sometimes I read through and double check. It's at least I at least write things that are readable and comprehensible, even if there are a few run-on sentences or ideas that thoughts I didn't quite finish. You talked a little bit about just in the letter about high school, like you built up sort of a procrastination and stress related to that. Like, how did that develop?
Well, yeah, like, so the thing about procrastination for me is that it was related to not wanting to do the thing to begin with. And that sort of like that was in high school. Like, I want time to free us to work, obviously, but not wanting to do the thing to begin with sort of built up that procrastination thing. And then when I would leave things to the last minute, then when I had to do the thing in the last minute, it was always very stressful, and it would encourage the procrastination to keep happening and happening and happening, which is why I went to a continuation school and did like basically 3 years worth of work in 1 year in order to graduate high
wish I
school
would
on
have done
time.
that. I wish I would have just gotten my GED. Man,
No, I didn't get a GED. I got a high school
Okay.
diploma, but
I wish I
got
would have
it
done
through a
something similar to
continuation
that.
program.
That where you just do a lot or this minimal necessary stuff to get some sort of high school equivalent in a short period of time. And I was reading some article against school, some Gatto article is like against school or something like that. One thing he was talking about is one of the things that you find in school that's kind of universal is boredom. And few things do I remember more about school than just that incredible sense of being bored. I spent so much time sleeping in class my junior and senior year. It was almost like a coping mechanism to endure what was going on. Learning should have been fun, but it's so boring and such dumb topics. And then you just end up learning something, and then you have to sit there and wait for 45 minutes while they sort of explain the same thing over and over again.
Well, I just sent something in the Twitter chat for Chain Reaction about Elon Musk and his view on school and what he did to sort of get around that. And if you wanted to screen share and play that, then that's that to me encapsulates sort of how I feel about school and what I've always sort of thought about it. So, and it's only like 3 minutes. So now that we're talking about school, if you wanted to do that, you could do that.
I will pull that up in a second. It's going to take me a little bit to set up OBS. What I think that I'm really I know that getting things done on time is sometimes a struggle for you, in other areas. And I'm really glad you wrote that letter. What do you think like needs to happen in your mental state in order to kind of get over the stress, procrastination, sort of avoidance hump?
Oh, well, I've been working a lot on that lately, actually. One of the things that I've been doing is using schedulers, using calendars, and making sure that I have enough time in the day to do everything, and also to hit all my networks, and also to work out a little bit. And basically, what I needed to do was I needed to nail myself down. I'm an ENTJ type, commander type in the 16 personalities, like Myers-Briggs thing. And what that means is that I'm really good at criticizing other people and finding out what they need to do. But that comes because I'm always criticizing myself much more than other people. And because I'm sort of this sort of way, it tends to make me very rude to other people when I don't necessarily mean to be. Sometimes I mean to be, but that's separate.
So you use kind of like the same language with other people that you do internally?
Yeah, well, lighter to other people. I'm much harder on myself. But what this means is that in order to be an effective ENTJ, I need to hold myself to the standards that I would hold other people to, but I also need to command myself first, meaning that instead of just being hard on myself and saying what I didn't do right, I need to tell myself to do things manually. And that sort of like goes back to the whole like school thing, because I'm ADHD. I've got the whole it's hard for me to keep on one subject or another if I'm not 100% invested in them, whatever those things may be. But that's not anybody else's fault, and it's also something I can work on.
Yeah.
And so, like, my advice to anybody who's struggling with like ADHD or trying to get things done on time, um, just create a system. It doesn't matter really what the system is. It just matters that it's a system. And then when you create that system, you'll be able to follow it. Like I've been consistently, at least twice a week, using my Tumblr, because I also wrote an apology over there for not, being there and constantly saying that I was coming back and then not coming back. Because this is a problem across the board with all of my things. Because I'm on like 30 different networks in total, and I only ever access like 6 or 7 of them at the same time. But all of this means essentially that now that I have this system, I've been using, for instance, Cortana a lot, and which is the AI for Windows.
Best name ever. As a big Halo 3 fan.
Yeah, and I've been, you can just schedule something. You can just say, remind me to do this at this time. And that's been helping a lot because it takes the pressure of remembering things off of it.
Cortana, remind me to end the state at 7:30.
Right? And she'll do that too, but it won't work because the state is entrenched. But yeah,
it's gonna take till 8.
Yeah. Well, but that's the general idea, is that like what I've been trying to do is systematize my life. Because I've just go ahead.
I was gonna ask a little bit of a distracting question maybe, so I don't know if you want to finish your thought.
Oh, go for it.
Okay. What's your experience with shame?
With shame?
Yeah.
I mean, I tend to spend a lot of my life trying to be as shameless as possible because originally, my experience with shame was often misplaced, and so I've sort of overcompensated with a huge amount of pride, and to me, shame can be useful, but typically it's just a tactic used to control somebody else. And so, like, I've tried to distance myself. Like, shame as a personal thing can be good, but shame from other people is almost always universally bad, which is why peaceful parenting, for instance, they say don't shame your child at all.
Right. It's a way to emotionally manipulate. Better than I find it preferable to violence, but it's just a way of kind of controlling your child because your child is dependent on you for their well-being. So when you are evaluating their goodness or badness and trying to use language like that, especially shaming language, to control them, it's a huge fear for them because they need you to accept them and approve of them just for their own survival in the world. So it's a very real, intense fear for them. So instead of shame, it sounds like you've chosen almost like a brazenness, or is that inaccurate language?
Brazenness a lot of the time, which is one of the reasons I tend to rush into things.
Okay. Have you is that the way you want to feel? Like pride instead of shame?
I think it could be useful. I think that really what I need to do if I'm going to do that is make sure that my system is good enough that I can still operate, effectively.
Yeah.
Because the idea of shame is to stop an action, but the idea of pride is to start one, whatever that action may be. And so, well, because if you're proud of something, it means that you're invested in the accomplishment of whatever that is. And whether that pride is earned or not is what's generally up for debate. But a lot of people don't even debate pride. They just say, it's an evil thing, it's a sin, or it's fucking don't be arrogant because that's assuming you're better than something else. when factually there are ways to determine what is better or worse.
In some specific areas.
Well, like, I mean, I'm not proud to be an American, for instance, because I had nothing to do with that decision.
Right.
But I am proud to be an anarchist because that's something that I had total control over, and it's something that can be used to help people. And not just other people but myself, because like the more anarchist you become, the more independent your thought becomes, So like I would say that people undervalue pride because they don't know what it is. They don't really understand it. And they've constantly been fed this line by those who are very prideful, which is the state, that pride is an evil thing.
Yeah, I think it depends upon how it is expressed and for what reasons. I mean, cuz there's a pride that's pretty damn destructive, I think, to people's internal well-being and to their relationships. But in terms of feeling some sense of accomplishment and being grateful or appreciating your own intellectual journey and the things that you've done to bring good into the world or to even bring good into your own life, it's almost a different sort of thing in nature than a sort of a more destructive pride. I haven't thought about it too much, obviously. Maybe something I'll see if I can actually clarify in the future in terms of distinguishing those two different conceptions, which it seems to be for me. I ask because I ask about shame because I know for me that has been historically one of the most debilitating emotions that I've had in terms of doing stuff, accomplishing things, finishing what I start. I try, and I don't know that I am successful, but I try to have a sort of a humble shamelessness. I don't know if I'm humble, and I know sometimes I still feel shame, but it used to be a universal experience, a constant experience in my life. It was pretty ubiquitous in every area, and it's relatively infrequent now. All right, I'm going to play this video by Elon Musk. It's like 2 minutes and 34 seconds. And during the video, I'll check out the chat and be active there if anyone is interested. All right, here we go.
Your 5 boys.
Actually, I created a little school. Yeah.
What kind of school? Could you describe to us?
Sure. It's small. It's only got 14 kids now, and it'll have 20 kids in September. It's called Ad Astra, which means to the stars. That's maybe a bit different from most other schools, is that there aren't any grades. There's no like not grade 1, grade 2, grade 3 type of thing. I'm making all the children go in the same grade at the same time, like an assembly line.
I know.
Because some people love English or languages, some people love math, some people love music, and they have different abilities at different times. It makes more sense to cater the education to match their aptitudes and abilities. So I think that's one principle. Another is that it's important to teach problem solving, or teach to the problem, not to the tools. So this would be like, let's say you're trying to teach people about how engines work, or you could start by a more traditional approach would be to say, well, we're going to teach you all about screwdrivers and wrenches, and you're going to have a course on screwdrivers, a course on wrenches, and all these things. And this is a very difficult way to do it. A much better way would be like, here's the engine. Now let's take it apart. How are we going to take it apart? Oh, you need a screwdriver. That's what the screwdriver is for. You need a wrench. That's what the wrench is for. And then a very important thing happens, which is that the relevance of the tools becomes apparent.
So all your 5 boys are in that school?
Yes.
Until when? This is from
I don't know.
preschool
So far,
to...
it's only 1-year-old. But they like it.
They like it?
Yeah.
And you want to keep them away from regular schools?
No, I just didn't see that the regular schools, they weren't doing the things that I thought should be done. Like, those 2 principles, they weren't adhering to those principles. So I thought, well, let's see what we can do. Maybe creating a school will be better. And actually hired a teacher from the school they were at who also agreed with me that there was a better way to do it.
Have they surprised you in a way of their innovative thinking?
Yeah, it seems to be going pretty well. I mean, the kids really love going to school. I think that's a good sign. You know, I mean, I hated going to school when I was a kid. It was torture. So the fact that they actually think vacations are too long, like they want to go back to school.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly.
That's weird.
I know.
All right, I really like Elon Musk in a lot of ways. I know I said I would be active in the chat. I lied because the way I set up my browser meant that I could not be without showing everyone the window that I had open. Yeah, that's interesting. I appreciate that. That is close to my own philosophy on school as well in terms of education. Musk though. Man, that dude, here's what he's brilliant at. Figuring out how to use corporate welfare to make a ton of profit. That frustrates me about him a little bit. So, what does he get? Does he have like 3 major companies now? Is that what it is? He's got Tesla, which gets subsidies for rich people that buy their vehicles. They get is it credits that they get? A tax credit?
It's something like that.
Yeah. So he's got that, and then he's got SpaceX, and I think he's talking about starting another company too. And SpaceX takes a ton of government money.
Well, you know, because here's the deal, though.
It's smart. It's intelligent business.
Well, yeah, but here's the thing, though. I mean, I'm all for abolishing corporate welfare, but only if that's actually what it is. And I have, most of the experience I have discussing that with, for instance, leftists, is that their version of corporate welfare is taking anything from the government while also a corporation. It's not that the corporation is getting exclusive benefits because they're a corporation. It's not as though, there's some sort of EBT program for the corporation and it can just cash in and get whatever it wants when it needs it, or commit food stamp fraud because you're corporate welfare. I think the term is so often a misnomer that it loses all of its traction. And if you really analyze it, for instance, there was this interview I saw with, and I think it was Tucker Carlson. And this socialist professor was demanding basically every bit of income that the wealthy make, that is, in her book, over $750,000 a year, should be taxed 80%. 80%. And the fact that it's already taxed hugely on a progressive scale, which stifles innovation to begin with. I mean, there's a great fucking extremely long presentation. I think it was 2 hours, where Peter Schiff fucking it was a glorious battle against the 99%ers in the Occupy Wall Street thing, where they were all fucking screaming at him and saying 1% evil, you got bailouts when he didn't, treating him as part of this giant monolith who, the government supports over the common folk. And none of them understood that essentially all these policies that they were advocating wouldn't do anything but mean that at a certain point, businesses would stop operating, and it would create artificial ceilings toward business growth.
Yes.
And
just create market inefficiencies.
Right. Because they can't hire at a certain rate because, too many fuckers are on an extremely high minimum wage, or there's extremely high taxes on all of their income. And so there's no incentive to continue producing after a certain fucking point, and so if you're a business and say, just hypothetically, because this barely ever happens, you take in more of this so-called corporate welfare than you do get taxed, then that would be corporate welfare, in my opinion. But I don't think that's what Elon Musk does with any of his stuff. I think he just uses uh, cooperating with the state to get these credits in the first place, filling out their ridiculous environmental quotas or whatever, um, you know, and being the person that he is, he probably, and I'd have to check the reports, but he probably doesn't take in nearly as much of this quote welfare as he's taxed. And if you're an anarchist who believes taxation is theft, and these people are getting money from the government, but they're getting more taken away than they're getting, then they're still being stolen from, and there's no welfare to begin with. It's sort of like the government saying, we'll provide you with roads so that you can get to your job, but you know what? We're going to tax you a ton to do that, and we're going to plunge you into debt, and we're going to create a huge control net on these roads, basically turning the world into a prison planet. And if people can find ways around that, and they don't take in more than they put out, then I wouldn't call it welfare at all. I'd still call it theft.
Sure, I don't know what the numbers are, but my point it still remains that he uses the money of the state to make profits and to increase his profits and to get more sales, which does at the very least give him a competitive advantage over people competing in the same market who do not.
I can vaguely agree to that, but I mean, a lot of these tax incentives are based on things that stifle innovation to begin with. So he probably is smart enough to know which ones do and which ones don't. But keep in mind, we work with a progressive scaling system, which means that the more profits he takes in, the more competitive he becomes, the more he's taxed. Which means essentially that yeah, sure, he's probably got a competitive advantage over other people who don't know how to gamify the theft system as much as he does. But I can almost guarantee that if you got into a conversation or I got into a conversation with him, if we somehow got that opportunity to get into that conversation with him about his views on taxation and government and society, that he would probably agree with us that taxation is theft, and that he'd probably have a pretty good explanation for being able to do all of this and not being unethical. Because I doubt he rakes in more from the government than the government rakes in from him. I don't think that's how it works.
Well, I don't begrudge him of it. I just think it is an effective business model to get some of your income from the state and to rely on things like the subsidies for the vehicles. That's one that it's just so annoying. Like I hate taxation, but I do feel slightly better when it goes to poor people than to help rich people afford nicer cars. Even though I understand how much it destroys poor communities as well, there's just something maybe about the aesthetic that I like more or dislike more about the helping people buy Teslas. I don't blame companies or individuals for taking state money. I don't even really have that much of a problem with it as a general rule. It's totally different if you are actually doing the working for the state in sort of an enforcement type job where is your role to initiate force on people. But I don't care if people work for the government for different sorts of income streams or whatever. Like if you're doing nursing or if you're even inspections or whatever, as long as you aren't a part of the maybe inspections would be a part of the enforcement system, but
well, they all sort
building
of
roads,
are,
all
like
that stuff, like
mandated reporting.
Yeah,
for the nurse part.
Oh, yeah. You don't have to follow through on that though. It's pretty flexible.
Yeah, but it's still there. Like a cop, like I saw a video recently. It was pretty legit, where a cop claimed to be a real big fan of Adam Kokesh when he pulled him over for bad registration.
Hilarious.
And didn't even give him a warning. Just talked with him for a bit about if he's moving, he should probably get that updated. And said asked him how how his shotgun rally went, and Adam gave him a book, a signed copy that said, basically respect, enforce natural law, brothers in enforcement of natural law, and the cop drove away, and so it's all cops are bastards, and I'm not going to stop saying that because there are a few good examples of cops who measure their power because they still have the authority to be bastards, so they're bastards. But that doesn't mean that all government workers are on the same ethical footing in my book. They're not. I'm not gonna have the same problem with the pieces of shit that were beating Kelly Thomas to death, or beating the fuck out of Rodney King. I'm not gonna have the same disdain for them as I would the people who teach
teacher.
first grade.
Yeah, exactly.
But that doesn't mean that I won't also have disdain for the first grade teacher, because there's statist filth who's indoctrinating people at a very young age toward believe that all of the things the state does is legitimate, and that it's legitimate to use the state as an enforcement mechanism. So whether
indeed that's what they are doing,
they're doing that. That's state curriculum. I mean, if you think about it, at a very young age, kids, whether they're being taught to obey authority figures or not, if they disobey the teacher, they will be smacked down. If they don't do something exactly the way the teacher wants, they will be smacked down, at least for the most part. And the teachers that don't do this are still mandated to do this, so they still agreed to do it. Sort of like the cops that don't beat the fuck out of people are still mandated to beat the fuck out of people. It doesn't matter how reasonable you are.
I think there are ethical ways to function within unethical systems. And I think there are ways of doing your job especially in the context of a teacher, which is completely ethical, even though you said you would do your job one way and you're doing it differently, but that's still a moral thing to do. I mean, lying to the state is not an immoral act.
Well, that's correct, but that implies that that's what they do. And I have yet to see an example of a teacher that completely chucked the state curriculum and didn't teach the way the state wanted them to and kept their job.
Well, you don't have to completely.
So if
you don't have to
find an example of a consistent person in that regard.
You don't have to completely chuck the statist curriculum in order to carry out your job ethically.
Why? You're indoctrinating kids.
I think you can avoid doing that without completely chucking out the statist curriculum.
I mean, why? How?
How?
Yeah.
Figure out what parts are indoctrination and don't teach those, or provide a counterpoint to the indoctrinating parts.
Yeah,
ask
but here's
questions.
But here's the thing, though. Like, in order to get funding, statist schools have to do those sorts of things. They have to indoctrinate. Like,
right, but I'm saying as an individual teacher, you can avoid doing so potentially and function in your job in an ethical way. If you are, some schools have a little more flexibility than others. I'm guessing that there are a number of schools in rural Wisconsin where you can get away with more of that stuff compared to California.
Well, I mean, until you're fired. But like, if for instance, I say, a teacher says to a student, I'll take the role of the student here, and the teacher, what's 10 plus 4 plus 10? And the student says 24, and the teacher says anything less than you're right, or anything more than you're right, sorry, then the teacher is going to say, show your work. Well, what if the kid is better at mental math? Well, then they're still saying that you have to show your work, not because it matters, but because they're teaching kids at a very young age that if you want this school or yourself in the future at some point to get funding, that you're going to have to do exactly what we say, no matter how reasonable or unreasonable it is. And to me, there is no way to be, totally not indoctrinating and be a public school teacher, because you have to be a public school teacher, and that means that you have to enforce the rules of public sector onto students, unless
Unless you don't.
well, unless you break the rules entirely, in which case, unless the school is completely unmonitored, which means it probably doesn't get funding in any significant way to begin with, unless you break the rules entirely, which the school, if it was monitored at all, would probably fire you. There's still going to be indoctrination in there, which is why I want private schools to overtake the public schools in all possible ways, because
Yeah.
that's the problem.
Well, the problem too is like the Department of Education is such a huge problem because it ends up being so in the government schools existing at all becomes highly problematic, because then you have a bunch of these private schools that imitate public schools in the way that they educate children, which the vast majority do. I think that they are better off in some ways, but you still have the same sort of formalized authority structure and this sort of idiotic division based upon age and the classroom teaching a bunch of kids a subject at one particular pace and teaching the subjects that you need in order to go to college and do well on the state tests. All that stuff creates a lot of problems, which prevents private school from being what it could be, like an actual education system.
Well, yeah, but like even that the word school, the reason we have that is because of the imported Prussian school system.
Yes.
And that system was designed to get people to be able to be more willing to run into gunfire, right? Like the whole thing, and then, we end up with this paradigm of you got to go to school, you've got to graduate school, you've got to do well in school, you have to go every day. And this paradigm that's created sends people to college. It's the K-12 education program. It fast tracks them to college. And colleges and universities used to be places of sort of more exclusive learning. And this more exclusive learning was designed for the best of the best. It wasn't designed for everyone. And the reason colleges want people isn't because of teaching. There are a lot of professors that want to teach and they want to help the world, but there aren't very many colleges that do. And so these colleges are mostly just trying to get state funding for doing whatever. And that means essentially that when the kids raised to constantly do what they're told. And then when they get sent to these colleges, they're also told to do what they're told. And it's just indoctrination, even at the college level, where they say, oh, everything's going to be different. All this bullshit that you dealt with in high school is all going to change. And then there's some that changes and some that doesn't. It's
pretty much the same old bullshit. I mean, I had the same delusions about college that most kids do, that this would be a place of a higher learning where educated people will talk intelligently about various subjects and things would be more advanced and clear, rational, and yeah, wasn't that way at all. It was just a different version of high school. The topics changed and the papers were longer. That was about it. All right, I got to get out of here, man. So I know you want to talk about Jeremy. Do you want to talk about that quick, or do you want to wait till next episode, or do you want to do a separate individual video that we can link to after this?
Let's do that next episode.
Okay.
Because that and a bunch of other topics that I was going to cover last week, and probably more will come up this week, I think would all be better to go over then. But I'm satisfied with this episode.
Hey, I'm glad we got to avoid talking about politics for the vast majority of it.
Philosophy.
Nice. Yeah.
Life is economics. I'm actually about to make a shirt for that too. La vie est économique.
What did you say? Life is economics?
Yeah.
What language is that?
La vie est économique.
Yes.
That's French.
Okay.
It's a play on c'est la vie, which is such as life, and it's sort of like a whatever shit happens thing. Instead of saying shit happens, I'm going to say life is economics.
France, it's really too bad. I mean, you got these these great 1900s laissez-faire economists, and now I don't know what's come out of France that's worth consuming.
Well, the Eurozone fucked everything up.
Are there any French thinkers that we should be appreciating right now?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of them, but we don't speak French, so we don't know them. Like, the reason we appreciate, like, Bastiat...
Well, someone's got to translate them. Yeah.
Well, but the reason we appreciate Bastiat is because we read the law in English.
Right. Yeah, I would not like it as much in French. All right, let's get out of here. Plug your shit.
All right, well, I'm I'm making t-shirts now, so you can check me out on Teespring. And you can hit me up on Insanity is Free on Twitter for more information on that and all of my other ventures personally, but also Moment of Rage with Jeremiah Harding on IPM Nation and journalisticrevolution.com. And you can find me at Insanity is Free pretty much fucking everywhere. So just hit me up if you're interested. And if you want to submit content to Time to Free Us, we have a contact page. And you can fill in the fields or email us an email, and we'll work something out.
All right, cool. If you want to follow me on Twitter at JeremiahJM, that's really the only platform I want you to follow me on, 'cause it's the only one I actively look at. And you can also follow the show's Twitter page. It's at Chain Reaction, and the T is a 1. We will talk at you next week. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you are doing well, and just have a great week, y'all. Peace.